Well, good evening. My name is Jeff Taylor. I'm president of the United Methodist Foundation, and we're glad to sponsor another of our webinar series for 2024. With me is Kim Matthews, who's the vice president of the foundation, and our presenter for the evening, Reverend Dr. Ken Sloane. Many of you, I know, recognize Ken. He's been with us on a number of these webinars, and he was at our live Academy of Faith and Generosity just about this time last year at Pipestem State Park. So Ken is a longtime friend and colleague of ours ever since he's been at the United Methodist Discipleship Ministries. We've known him and collaborate with him in a number of ways. Ken is a clergy member of the Greater New Jersey Conference. He served churches there for over 20 years, including a successful new church start, and then served 5 years as the director of connectional ministries. In 2006, he was appointed to serve as the director of communications at UMCOM, United Methodist Communications, and traveled all around the denomination doing presentations on how to interpret connectional giving to local churches. He moved into his stewardship role at what is now called United Methodist Discipleship Ministries in 2011. He's an author of some of the guidelines books at Cokesbury on stewardship and lay servant ministries, connectional living, several of those, and is considered one of our denominational leaders in the area of stewardship and generosity. We're delighted to have you with us again tonight, Ken. And before we get started, just a few matters of housekeeping. At the bottom of your screen, you should see both a Q&A and a chat. And we're going to use both of those features tonight. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And Kim and I, mostly Kim, will be monitoring the Q&A, and she will determine whether she needs to interrupt Ken to take a question immediately or if it can wait till the end of the presentation. And then there's going to be a time during Ken's presentation where he is going to ask you to put something in the chat. So we want to test that chat feature now. And so I'm going to ask you, if you would, to just open up the chat and put your favorite ice cream color or flavor or color or flavor. I like brown ice cream. Are you getting some answers, Kim? You're muted, Kim.
We are getting lots of different kinds of ice cream, from vanilla to peanut fudge ripple, all kinds, and red.
But no colors?
Red.
Oh, okay.
I like someone who said this week it's peanut butter fudge ripple.
Yeah.
People are open to new things.
We have a brown too.
Okay. Well, I'm glad
Great.
that's working. Some of you may have been on the webinar. I don't know if it was last year. I think it was last year when we kept encouraging people to put things in the chat. And then it wasn't until after the webinar had ended that we realized we had set it up so that the chat wasn't functioning. So we wondered, gee, these people just aren't engaged. And it was our now we know that it's working, so please feel free to use that. And as I said, Ken is going to invite you to use the chat feature at some point during the presentation. So Ken, Take it away.
Thank you very much. It's good to be
Welcome.
with everybody. And thanks for having me tonight. And it's good to see that there's as much passion around ice cream as that I have. And that's always good to be with your people. So I'm going to take a minute to share, get my slides set up. And I believe that you have, that Kim has sent a copy of these to you. And one of the things that I've done in this particular presentation, which I've never done before, is I probably have put some, I believe I have put some not QR codes, some links, some links to some things that I'll reference at different spots in the program. I realize that asking somebody who's kind of managing in the background of this to kind of find these links and put them up all gets to be a little much. And so you may get some of that in the chat, but also when you look at your handouts for the slides, look and see there'll be some codes underneath the little note lines there. And I hope some of those will be helpful to you as we move along. So anyway, so the topic we're talking about tonight is making annual campaigns your own. And for a while since I've had this position, every couple of years, I get a lot of requests for people to help us with campaigns and different things. And so I try to introduce some of the package kind of campaign things that are out there. But more and more, I'm really trying to take a bigger look at a campaign as how it fits into kind of a whole stewardship plan. And so we're going to talk a little bit about both of those. I always like to kind of start with this to tell you about some resources that you can find after the webinar is over. We have a great web page that's easy to navigate. It's called umcdiscipleships.org/stewardship. And anything that I produce or put content in, I put it up there. And so you'll find things up there. You'll find webinars that are upcoming. You'll find articles that I write for the newsletter. You'll find all kinds of stuff that's up there. We also have a Facebook page, which if you're interested in stewardship, join our Facebook group. And I try to put a couple different things up there every week or so if I can. And then my email address is there as well on the bottom. And I invite you to, if you have any questions that we don't get to in the course of the webinar, just drop me an email. I'll be happy to answer that. Or if anything that comes up, even something that's not related to the webinar, but you have a stewardship question, just pop an email to me is the best way to get a hold of me. I like to do this in every webinar I do. And because sometimes people think that that in this role that I have, that I am the expert for knowing what the right thing is to do in your church. And that's absolutely not true. Of anybody who's gathered here, you are the context expert for your church. And so what I try to do is I try to listen to a lot of things that churches are doing to find some good ideas. I talk to people who work in the field, who do fundraising and do different aspects of these things, run campaigns. And then I put the ideas before you, and I put them there. So the idea that you know what might work in your local church. And so I think that's really important, is that we kind of know that you have the expertise for what is going to work well in your context. And so that's in the case of how we present things to you in the webinar tonight. I realize that everything I'm going to suggest is not necessarily going to fit in your context, and churches look all kinds of different on the outside, and they look different on the inside. And so I just really encourage you to see if there's anything, if there's one or two ideas that we share tonight that you think are going to could get some traction in your local church, then I think we've done our job. So let me start by kind of saying that I think, in my opinion, and maybe you agree with this or whatever, that the experience of the COVID pandemic gave us the opportunity to look at how we do annual campaigns. When 2020 was kind of starting off and we got those early days of the pandemic, one of the first things that came to my mind was, how is this going to impact when the fall comes along? And if we're still in this kind of situation that we were in, not knowing how long it would last. I mean, it doesn't seem that it's even gone now. We're seeing again more and more cases reported and new vaccines are coming out. But, how's it going to change how we look at doing annual campaigns? Well, certainly, the models that we have of doing congregational dinners and things like that were all very challenged in that particular time in history. And I think it gave us some opportunities to look at some things different. We'll talk tonight about all of these kind of package campaigns that are available through our Cokesbury store, through their online. There are a number of them out there. They have a lot of good luck. A lot of churches I know have used Consecration Sunday year and year again and really believe in it. And then every once in a while they'll call me and they'll say, we've been doing Consecration Sunday a lot, but we don't know what else is out there, and we'd like to kind of get a change up for a little bit, and we talk about those kind of things as well. So I am going to give you kind of a real brief overview at the end of what the campaigns are that are boxed, that are available through Cokesbury, and there's still some really good ones there, but again, you have to kind of find the one that may fit in best, not only with your congregation, but with the particular time that we're in right now. And I'll talk more about that as well. But beyond an annual campaign, what would happen if we actually devised a year-long strategy to look at stewardship and present stewardship to our people? And that strategy would actually prepare our folks for the things that we were going to ask from them at the time of the annual campaign. And I'm not talking about doing the campaign and starting it in January and keeping that theme going, but planning things that really were going to be open people's minds and hearts to the idea of generosity, of stepping up, of experiencing the joy of giving in a way that challenges them and reflects their commitment, and also in seeing generosity as part of their discipleship and what it means to become a growing and maturing disciple of Jesus Christ. So the old model for stewardship was the Stewardship Sunday model. And in some places it was expanded maybe into a couple of weeks of Stewardship Sunday, or even maybe a stewardship month or something if you had, maybe 6 weeks that you focused on it. But in that model, unfortunately, what sort of happens is that it kind of compartmentalizes stewardship so that we do it in that month. And of course, I picked November because, when I was a local church, that was what was the tradition was, the week before Thanksgiving, you wanted people to make their commitments when their hearts were ready, to be thankful and joyful. And after I left the local church and was working here in Nashville, my wife Bridget and I were shopping around at different churches to figure out where we were going to settle. And we were visiting a large church in the Nashville area, and we happened to be there in the fall, and we got a campaign letter from them, and it started with this absolute line. I mean, I still have the letter. And the letter said, nobody likes to talk to money, but we have to do this once a year. And I thought, my gosh, I said, if that isn't a way to set stewardship up as some bad tasting medicine that, we have to hold our nose and swallow it. And once we take it, then we don't have to worry about it for another year and put it away. And I realized at that point that I think that was really crippling people's growth in stewardship, because we saw it as something that was just connected with a pledge card and a budget, and that was the end of it. And so really from the early times of when I arrived here in this particular role, I've kind of worked to kind of encourage people to say, we need to give stewardship more time. I mean, we know that Jesus talked about money and possessions more than any other topic in the gospel, with the exception of maybe the kingdom of God. But it was important to Jesus that people learn how to live and how to be good stewards, how to live with the money they had and how to live with the world and the environment they had. And so by just kind of compartmentalizing it, we were really missing an opportunity. So here's what Jeff was telling you when I want you to do something for me in the chat. And so here are 3 kind of positions that I've just picked out. And it starts with, we don't have a campaign or a strategy. We share the budget and we hope people are going to give enough to cover costs. And I've given that the red color. And then the middle one is, we do a fall campaign, but we pretty much don't talk about stewardship until it's time to plan the next fall campaign. And I've given that the color blue. And the last one is, we have a campaign, but it's part of a year-round strategy for teaching stewardship and helping people become generous disciples. Now, you may fit into one of those 3 categories, red, blue, or yellow, or in terms of your church, or you may be somewhere in between them. And so I've given you the option of putting in the chat, either if your church is red, blue, or yellow, or if they're purple, because they're somewhere between red and blue, or if they're green, because they're somewhere between blue and yellow. So take a minute and do that. And I'm going to open up the chat window so that I can see what's going on. And this just gives you a chance for me to kind of see the things that are happening here. And actually, my chat, well, here it's up here. There it is. Strawberry. Oh, that's the ice cream. Wait a minute. That gets confusing, doesn't it? Let's see. I got to scroll down. Okay. I see a lot of purples. I see some reds. Okay. Blue to green. Oh, that's good. Okay. Blue to green, somewhere in that area. None of the above. Okay. I'm guessing that means you don't do a campaign, you don't share the budget. You just hope that it's people are going to give. All right. Well, thanks for giving me that feedback. That helps. A little purple with a new pastor in July 1. I'm not sure what color it's going to be. Okay, great. Well, thanks. That is helpful. I think you'll find some information here. And again, I'm not going to sway you one way or the other because you are the experts for your congregation. But again, I'll throw out some ideas and see if there's anything here you think might get some legs. So we're going to move on. Here and make this move. Okay, here we go. So if we could shift the focus in a church from an emphasis on stewardship that's only seasonal and then broaden it and really kind of come at it from the angle of what does it mean for discipleship to live faithfully and to be generous. And to me, if I had to pick a wide angle strategy to kind of pick what might that come from or how that might focus, I think those are the words that I would really lift up. And again, we'll explore about that a little more. It's important to remember that the most important factors for donors, there's been all kinds of studies done on this, and folks in the nonprofit world can tell you this in a heartbeat, that the three most important factors for a person to make a commitment and to be a donor is first belief in the church, in the mission of the organization. Second is faith and respect for the leader. In the case of a nonprofit, probably the CEO, the person who is the visible face, and probably for the church, it's the pastor. And then the third one is transparency and finances. And that when people really know what's going on and things are not done under the table and things are not hidden. And I think those are important. And I especially going to focus on the mission because I think that's really more and more what we've got to be in touch with is what do we see as our mission of a church and how are we achieving that? Here's a great bit of guidelines that came from this wonderful book. And if you happen to be at the event that that Jeff and the foundation hosted last year in the fall, you probably got one of these books and you got to hear Lovett Weems speak in person. But Lovett and Ann wrote this book, and I think it's one of the best books I've seen come along. But there's two lines in it that I try to use as often as I can because I think they're powerful lines. And their principle one is never talk about people's money apart from their discipleship. I think that's a succinct way to keep that in mind, that this is how we keep people focused, not on giving to the budget, but giving to the church's mission and ministry. And the second principle they lift up is that we never talk about the church's money apart from its mission. Now, I really believe this. I said this last fall when I was speaking and Lovett was there and sitting. I think if churches could really buy into this and hold each other accountable to actually do this, not just in a public way, but even in their meetings and even in their discussions, if they only talked about people's money in the context of their discipleship, on how giving and generosity are important to growing as disciples, and if we didn't talk about the church's money apart from its mission, that we began to move away from talking about money as what we need for the budget or what we need to pay the bills, but talking about money because this is what drives and fuels the mission of our church, whether it's Sunday school, whether it's outreach work that we do, whether it's our worship service. We talk about these because these are what our mission is. This is what we're in. And to achieve our mission, we need to have this financial fuel. We need to keep the lights on. We need to be able to keep the heat on. We need to be able to reach out to folks in a way that makes them feel welcome. All those things are all part of our mission. So as you get ready to think about both your strategy and I think also your campaign as well, I think one of the things that's important is to kind of take a bigger picture of this, to look beyond just covering the budget excuse me, and to say, what are the things that we're hoping for from this campaign beyond just, getting money together that we know is going to come in to cover the budget, or we hope is going to come in to cover the budget. And there's lots of things to consider. And here's just a partial list of things that, that I've thought of is, are we looking for people to be more consistent in their giving? One of the things I talked about in a webinar I did earlier today was about, electronic giving. And one of the blessings of people who are able to go up and set up recurring giving is that really is the most consistent way right now that we have to know that there's income coming in. If people go on board on an online giving platform and say, every 2 weeks, this is the amount that I'm going to give. And then we don't, it leaves all that wondering about, well, what if somebody goes away, or what if somebody, has a trip or whatever. We know consistent giving is coming. And this, of course, was a big deal in the middle of the pandemic. Maybe one of our goals we want to see happen is we want to see some people stepping up. We have people who give, but we have people who've been giving at the same level, for a number of years. Maybe we want some people to move closer to tithing, to move up and to take the challenge of a percentage giving and move that percentage up in that process. Maybe there are some needs around the church that you would need some special gifts for. Maybe you'd like to know that some people are considering including the church in their will and their planned giving. And that's a great place, again, to connect with Jeff and the foundation, because this is their area of expertise. They know not only how to set things like that up, but how to talk to people about that in a way that is not threatening, but is a kind of a way that just helps people see what kind of options there are. Maybe one of your goals is that you want people to take their membership vows more seriously about prayers, presence, and service. Maybe you're a kind of a church where it seems like there's just a small group of people who are getting involved and a lot of spectators, and you'd like to have more of the spectators come down from the stands and be on the field. Maybe a goal in terms of stewardship is discipleship growth. We believe if people take a bold step in their giving, that it's going to increase their discipleship. They're going to feel more attachment and more investment in the church, and that's going to help them mature. And again, maybe one of the goals is to include education, so people understand a broader idea of stewardship in different ways, like stewardship of the earth and how our stewardship affects what's going on in the world in terms of climate change. So those are that's a partial list, and you can come up more, but identifying what kind of things you hope for, again, beyond the basic need that we all know, that you want to cover the budget, you want to have them a reliable source of money to fuel mission of the church. These are just some ideas of ways that you can have those conversations. This was a booklet that I put out a number of years ago, and it's still available online, and I think the link for it is in your handouts. It's called A 12-Month Plan for Stewardship. It actually, I found something that was done by Herb Mather, who was one of my predecessors in the Discipleship Ministries, had retired by the time I got there, but was still living in Nashville, and we got together and talked, and he had done this 12-month plan for stewardship. And so I kind of grabbed it, we posted it on the website, and we made a little booklet about it. But you might find some good tips in there. And of course, when Herb wrote the book, email wasn't a big thing then, so it's a lot about letters and things like that. But one of the things that you'll find is that there's a number of places in there where he refers to another book that he has written, which is out of print, and it was called, I think, Letters for Church Leaders or Letters for Stewardship. I can't remember exactly what the name of it is, but it really was a very cool book. And I got permission to scan it, so it's available as a PDF, as a download. So that's be a great place for you to go to look for if you're looking for ideas of how to put together a year-round strategy. And if you go to the website and look for year-round strategy, I have a whole webinar that I do on that topic. One of the things I think that the pandemic gave us was the opportunity for people to see that we could move into some new areas. We could kind of embrace some new technology, and we could try some new things. And again, we could learn as we try, and maybe things don't go so well, we get a little better each time we try. And so I think that openness is going to be an important thing as you ask people to maybe, develop some things around in the year-round basis that might be ways to try and do stewardship a little differently and present it to the congregation a little differently. One of the things in the pandemic that we talked about was, how people do campaigns. Well, one of the campaign models that was out there was to use small groups. And we said, well, maybe you could do small groups, and have people gather via Zoom. And you make an agenda about talking about the mission of the church and the growth and people's hopes, that we have in the church beyond just the budget, of ways we like to see the ministry grow. And then after the pandemic got a little less severe, we talked about people saying, hey, these kind of small group models are a great way for people to talk and for there to be listening. And so you have the opportunity to hear about how people feel about the programs and the mission the church is doing, and what areas get them excited and what areas touch their passions. And that's an important thing when we begin to look at our members as people who are donors, and again, to potentially find what are the things that excite them, what kind of things get them motivated, and where are the best places to talk with people about, the impact that we make and how, in a way that it might lead them to take some growth and generosity. As you prepare to do that, one of the things I challenge folks to do on a regular basis is to look at the mission that you've articulated for your church. I think every church has some kind of mission, even if it's just the mission of the United Methodist Church, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. But if your church has a mission, it's a good time to kind of look at it. I think, every 3 or 4 or 5 years at the most, we should look at our mission and say, is that really how we kind of see ourselves with the people that we have here gathered? Is that where we feel like Christ is calling us to? And here's an article that I posted back in 2022 about 10 questions to ask about your church's mission. Does this mission really reflect who we are? It's kind of the basic question of that, but a number of things for you to look at in there. And again, I think you'll find this link in the handouts. One of the things that I find, and as I talk with people, is that one of the things that differentiates a year-round strategy from just doing a stewardship time in the fall is that these conversations about money are so important that sometimes we need to do those conversations when we're not asking people to give. And I've heard that phrase from people, the one that kind of is in people's minds all the time is somebody who doesn't go to church because they say the church only wants me to give. It's only interested in my money. What I hear more from people who are actually in the church sometimes is sort of a concern is the only time the church talks about money is when they want me to give. And really what I hear in that is that people are hungry for some conversations about money in our lives and how that leads in our lives and how it dominates our lives. I heard someone speak in a conversation about talking about money and why we're afraid to talk about money. And one of the reasons that they kind of offer that we're afraid to talk about money so much is because it's so important in people's lives, that it's almost like a god in some people's lives. The pursuit of more money, of how it lives in our life, how we worry about whether there's going to be enough money. It's just been so raised up in our lives that it's on such a high level that talking about it even is challenging to folks. And the reality is we oftentimes haven't done that well, but to talk about money and to talk about some of the values that we have around money and where those values come from at a time when we're not asking people to give it to the church really lifts it up as an important concern. And it's really not us talking as much as it's having Jesus talk through us, because Jesus talked in the parables and so many places in the gospel about how money can kind of become a barrier for us to having the full life that God needs for us. So as we talk about things in this year-round stewardship, consider these kind of conversations and how much more power they can have if we're not having this kind of conversation at a time when we're asking people to give. And so there's a bunch of different great studies that go out there, and some of them are tied to the campaigns that I showed you up in the beginning. Jim Harnish, who was pastor, just retired from a large church in Tampa a few years ago, did this wonderful series on Earn, Save, Get on Wesley's famous sermon about earn all you can, save all you can, so you can give all you can, and talking about these simple rules for money. And it's a great study that goes with it. And oftentimes people say, okay, well, we're going to do the study during November when we're having the campaign. Well, I think it has power when you do it, even if you do it during Lent or you do it earlier in the year. And you help people kind of get those values. And again, that becomes part of your year-round strategy. I don't want to beat that to death. Adam Hamilton's Plan Enough really started as a book and a sermon series that Adam was preaching to folks when he really felt like people had kind of been spending over their heads. And when the recession of 2008 happened, he was amazed at how many people in his congregation were really devastated by it. And he said, how did I never realize this? And how did I never preach about this? And so that's really where Enough came from. Tom Berlin, who's just elected as a bishop and serving in Florida, was in Virginia conference, did a great series called Defying Gravity, talking about how we're living this culture of more and we accumulate so much stuff that it kind of weighs us down. And so his idea of defying gravity is if we can get rid of some of the stuff that we feel like we need, we'll feel lighter. We'll feel more, more able to kind of float. But it's just a cool little book and study that you can look at. Mike Slaughter wrote The Christian Wallet, which is about how we use our money affects our conscience. Oops, sorry, wrong way. And then Scott McKenzie and Christine Miller, who are part of this team at Horizon Stewardship, have this generosity challenge, a 28-day study of prayer and faith around generosity, and a very challenging course. And then this one that I kind of have some passion for because I had an opportunity to be involved in its creation and reviewing some of it, was It's Saving Grace, which is a Wesleyan-based approach to help people manage their money better for the purpose of going to a place of financial well-being where there's less stress in our lives. And we know that stress causes illness, physical illness, and all kinds of emotional unrest, but it's helping people get to a point where the money isn't building their stress level. And it's a great study that's done, and there's a version that's appropriate for clergy to do together, but there's also a regular guidebook, which is this one, for groups to do in local churches, and there's great resources that go along with it as well. One of the things that's happened kind of through the pandemic, and I think it's kind of a neat thing as we move along in campaigns, is the idea, a lot of these studies came with little devotionals that we would order and get little books and try to give them out to people in our churches and whatever. Well, Cokesbury has begun licensing digital versions of these devotions. And so you can find a number of these series that we've talked about with a little accompanying devotional booklet. Now, when you see that price there, you have to understand that that's the price for licensing up to 100 copies of this particular devotional. If your church is a smaller membership church, I think there's a step down that's like up to 50, and that's only like under $40. The one that I'm looking at right now. But somewhere in those ranges that you can get smaller quantities as well. And that gives you a license to email it to folks and say, please open this up in a PDF. You can have it on your Kindle, or you can just have it on your computer, and take time every day to do this devotional with us together. And again, it's adapting to a new technological world that we're living in. And so that can be a great way to get people focused. And again, it doesn't have to be particularly during the month that you're going to do your campaign. It can be at any time. It could be a Lenten devotion. It could be something you work with that way. This is just a tacky plug for the narrative budget course that I lead. But I think it's a great tool to bring into your campaign. It helps us take the line item budget that we have and convert it into a story that tells about the impact of our church. And so as we put these in, they will, excuse me, I read the question there. I was trying to respond to it. Let me take a minute to do that. So can the slides be made any larger and can placed on the top above the slide so that they are larger? I don't know that I can do that. And I think it has to do with your screen. That's a really good question. I sometimes drag myself on top, but I think when I'm sharing my screen, I don't think I can do that particularly. Let me try that. It's going to block stuff out. I just make it as full screen as you can at home. I think that's the way to do that. Anyway, the narrative budget course is open right now. Its main ideas is to help you develop a narrative budget that you can either create in a print version or a web version that you can use, or some digital version. It keeps the focus on what the stories of impact for folks. And the other thing it does, it helps us approach a budget with an idea that that there's no separation between operational dollars and mission dollars. In the narrative budget, we put all those dollars together with the understanding that there is no mission program without the operations numbers that under it. There's no worship without the lights and the insurance and the maintenance on the organ. These things don't happen that we call mission or ministry dollars don't happen without that underlying money. And so we basically ask folks to identify 4 or 5 mission areas or ministry areas in their church. One could be mission, one could be nurture, one might be worship, whatever they are, hospitality. And then we divide the whole budget into those categories, and we have a formula and a workbook for doing that. So again, that's just that of course is open now. It'll be open until actually be open until the end of January, I believe. So oops, get back into that. Thank you. Some of the things that are tried and true, I'm looking at my time here so we get moving. Some things tried and true that have been parts of campaigns for a long time. One of the age-old secrets of stewardship is the more people you get involved, the greater the success. If you can have people who actually volunteer to be part of some aspect of your campaign and what you're putting together, your strategy, they've already made that first step of buy-in. So that still follows through. If you can do a stewardship strategy with 3 people, you could probably put a campaign together, maybe with 5 people. But the more people you can get involved, the more people you can ask to do an important job, whatever it is, in terms of making that happen. They're going to have a little more buy-in because they're part of the planning on that. And that goes back to when I was ordained and appointed to my first church in 1981, 43 years ago. We had to do a campaign to put a new roof on the church, and we put it together, and we got a biggest group together. And then the night before we went out to do visits, we all made our pledges, and we covered 85% of the cost just from the people who were already committed by giving their time and being involved. So that secret continues to work as we make our plans. Plan works when you work to plan. If you invest in your church, invest in one of these campaigns, and they give you directions how to do it, my advice is do what they tell you to do. If the campaign doesn't work so well for you, and then you discover that, well, we scaled back on this, we didn't think the number of letters they asked for was, we needed all those letters, we didn't need to do all this, and they're not happy with the success, I say, the plan works when you work the plan. That's actually Jim Sally, who heads up at the Africa University Development Fund. I said that in a number of meetings that I've been with him at, and he says the plan works when you work the plan. So Jim's a good resource for that. Use pictures, use video, tell stories. I say this all the time. We're living in a time when almost everybody's got a camera in their pocket, and most of us have a video camera in our pocket. And we should be collecting those stories and those pictures of when we're in the middle of something happening, whether it's worship or something else. I was the church that Bridget and I attend, the Sunday before last, they had a member of the youth group who had never been baptized and asked the pastor to be baptized and wanted to join the church and wanted to be baptized by immersion. And so at the end of the service, we all went outside on the lawn, and right there, cars were driving by, and did that baptism of that young man. And he not only did the baptismal vows himself, but he took the membership vows himself and clearly took it seriously. It was a changing point in his life. Well, that's a story of impact. Every time we do a baptism, every time we get a kid in Sunday school and work with them, those are all ways in which our churches are making an impact. So as you do these things, again, dream, cast a vision. One of the things I tell folks in stewardship all the time is don't beg people, and don't try to scare people into giving. That's not productive. But cast a vision for what your church could do. What your plan is to do in this year, and here's what else we could do if we went beyond what our hopes are. If we all moved up. So again, I think these are key things for folks to look at. Have a dream. Look beyond what you're just doing now. I tell people all the time that if you have a budget that stays the same from year to year, and I think I'm going to talk about that. I got a slide for this. But if you have a budget that stays the same, what you're really saying is we're going to do less next year because inflation's already taken some of the power out of that. And so, but again, it's keep your focus on the mission, not on paying the bills. And again, look at that mission and where it might grow. And thank yous. Just be intentional about thanking people as much as you can. I made a big pitch in my previous webinar that I did this afternoon for people to make sure that if you send out quarterly giving statements, and I hope that you do that, please make sure there's something in there that thanks people for their giving. And if possible, tells them a story about some impact that their giving made. That's about the best advice I can give in terms of how do you reach people and make people feel appreciated in their giving. Remember that one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's important to ask yourself, what has your church done in the past? If I go in to talk to a church and I'm going to talk about a campaign, first thing I'm going to ask them is, has your church used a campaign before? Have you used pledge cards? Do people feel comfortable doing pledge cards? Would an estimate of giving card feel better? How often do you talk about giving? Is giving one of those taboo subjects still in your church that you don't talk about? Because that's going to tailor, what this campaign has to do. If you've got to doing this campaign is the only time you could talk about giving, you need to talk about it in a context that's broader than just what the budget needs. And how well is your present giving meeting your church expenses? If you're constantly behind and you have a budget that's, oftentimes I talk to churches and they were a larger church at one point and they had, some multiple staff positions or whatever. And as their membership has decreased, they still only see themselves as a large church. And they still see that they need to have 3 people on the music staff, or they need to have, a paid person doing things that maybe volunteers could do. And so these are important questions to ask because, again, you want to say, what's the size that we need? What's going to fit our needs? I also talk about this in terms of the campaign. I also think it's important to say that, one message doesn't fit everybody as well. And, when we were back in the days when we had a mimeograph machines, I'm showing my age now or whatever, and we duplicated one letter, we sent it to everybody in the church. That was pretty much what, in practicality, we were able to do. But let me use an example. Excuse me. This is Alice. And Alice turned 100. And her celebration was in her church. And Alice has been in that church for 75, 80 years. She's been coming to the church regularly. She's been involved in everything as a younger woman up until, now she still makes every UMW meeting, whatever. And her heart is completely in the church. Excuse me, I went the wrong way. Here's the Ryan family. The Ryan family has been coming to the church on and off for about 6 months, but we really think that they're starting to be consistent, and they're kind of early in that stages of thinking that they may be interested in joining at some point. Well, clearly, you don't want to send the same letter to Alice that we're going to send to the Ryans, because they're at different places in their discipleship and different places in their journey. And another example would be Bob. Now, Bob is a successful insurance guy in town. A lot of people do their insurance business with him. He comes pretty regularly. But Bob hasn't changed his giving in 10 years. He's given an amount which 10 years ago, I guess he thought was a really good amount, a real good support. But, maybe it may be time to kind of say in some kind of special way saying, we really hope that some folks could step up because, the last couple of years have been really challenging for the church. And unless some of our members are able to kind of take a step, we're going to have to really look at pulling back on some of this mission and ministry that we need to do. And so it's just 3 examples, but you may have more categories and stuff than that. But I think it's important to say that, now that we have the ability with electronic and digital communication to kind of have some different ways of approaching people. And this does not mean that you have to know what people give, that the finance committee needs to all know what people give so they know what letter they get. But there's other ways to discern that involvement and those things that happen. And by the way, the discipline does say now that the pastor should have access to the giving records. It's an important way for pastoral care for them to know that. We don't have to debate that tonight, but I think you can kind of do this idea of finding some different messages that speak to people in different places on their journey. And again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but remember this, that the same amount of dollars in your 2023 budget is not going to support the same amount of ministry in 2024. And again, I have an article that you may want to read, and my mind was really opened up to this idea by Joe Park, who's at Horizon Stewardship, and he spoke to a group in the foundation about inflation-adjusted dollars and how that impacts on churches. And I said, boy, I never really thought about talking with folks in that context, but it's so important that we realize that if we're struggling and we keep the budget the same, what we're really doing is committing to do less ministry and less mission in the coming year. And we need to communicate that to people. If we don't at least keep pace with inflation, we're going to be losing ground. And again, it also affects people and in terms of how they give and whatever, that we make some awareness of that. I mentioned Joe Park and I mentioned Horizons earlier. They have some great ebooks on this subject, and one in particular that you might want to look at is a couple of case studies they did around churches that were kind of getting bored with the way they were doing annual campaigns, and they had some different ideas. It may be applicable again to your church. It may not be in the context of your church, but anyway, that's available, and I think the Giving 365 link should be in your handouts. I believe that I put it in there. So you go to Cokesbury's website and you want to look at what the campaigns are up there, and I'm going to go through this real quick because I want to have time for questions. So you see the variety of different campaigns that are up there. And again, we'll talk about some of these. One of the tried and true ones is the Consecration Sunday. It just got a redo of its cover, and I noticed that Eugene Grimm, and I have some of his stewardship books in there, is now co-authoring it with Herb, and I think Herb Miller's getting older now and realizing somebody else has to kind of keep this going. But again, here are some of the characteristics of it. It gets good reports. It emphasizes tithing and percentage giving, if that's a message that goes well in your particular congregation. And the commitments are usually done in the worship setting, but it's not a focus on budget and bills. It's a focus on generosity, which it's a great kind of way to approach it. Extravagant Generosity was Michael Reeves and Jennifer Tyler. That's been out for a few years. It's based off of Bishop Schneeze's book, The 5 Practices of Fruitful Congregations, one of which was Extravagant Generosity. And a great way, again, to prepare to, if you were to use a program like this, would be to do a study of the 5 Practices of Fruitful Congregations somewhere during the year. And when people got to Extravagant Generosity, they would know what you were talking about. It would resonate with them. It's pretty current material. Good sermon suggestions in there. Great graphics. There's a great flow chart that's in there as well. And all the resources I'm going to mention, when they came out, they probably had DVDs or those kind of things with them, or I think they eventually moved to flash drives. But most all of the content that Cokesbury sells now that's of a media variety is on their Amplify website. So again, if as I went through this, I still had DVDs listing, but multimedia content is available with all these, so you don't have to find graphics and things like that. Adam Hamilton's Enough, I mentioned it already. Strong focus on personal stewardship, on budgeting, debt, saving, tithing. Joy and contentment that comes through simplicity. Sorry about that. Jacob Armstrong's book Treasure has a great campaign that goes with it. Focuses on what do we value in our life? What is our treasure? What are the things that are most important to us? All the scriptures that are there, I think it's a 4-week preaching suggestion all around Matthew 6, Sermon on the Mount, 4 Sundays, and sermons and discussion guides. Also material for study groups as well. I mentioned Jim Harnish's program. It's giving from a Wesleyan perspective. I think people have asked me what's a good one to do this year. I think because of all we've been through with disaffiliation and people trying to understand, what are really Wesleyan and Methodist values or whatever, people I think have a higher interest in what Wesley taught and what his sermons are. So this might be a good choice for folks to use this year. when there's been a lot of talk about, about our Wesleyan values and how we're upholding those. Again, it's got some great preaching samples, some great guides. I think it also has some age level resources as well. So there's some programs that can be done in a Sunday school setting, youth and children's resources. Mike Slaughter put this one out. It's called First. It's putting God first in our lives and following along that way. It's based on a book that he wrote called Shiny Gods. They didn't necessarily think that Shiny Gods was a particularly good stewardship campaign title, but it all kind of ties into what the book's about. And it's got an intergenerational study schedule and ways to bring all different ages in. And it suggests a 10-10-80 model, which is, we save 10, we share 10, and 80% is what we live on in our lives. Defying Gravity, again, Tom Berlin wrote it while he was still a pastor in Virginia. It also has some mentoring videos that Tom did for pastors and leaders who are going to lead the campaign, which is really kind of a neat thing, and a leader's guidebook. 4 Sundays, again, with sermons and book for study groups. It also comes a little 28-day hard pack that your people can take home with them. It gives them things to talk about at the table. Last one, I think, is Committed to Christ. Bob Crossman out of Arkansas was one of my colleagues at Discipleship Ministries in the new church development area. Did this in the church he was in. It was giving in the context of discipleship, and he took it actually to cover 6 attributes: prayer, Bible reading, worship, witness, financial giving, and service, and actually includes 6 commitments that people are asked to make. So the idea is people make commitments around not just their giving, but around all these different subjects. Again, if you are in a church that has never done pledges or commitment cards or something like that, this might be an interesting way to get people to feel more comfortable with that, to ask them to make the commitments to their prayer and their Bible reading and worship. And again, before you ask them for financial giving, and hopefully they understand that in the flow of all the different approaches to discipleship. So, and Transform Giving is John Ed Matheson. Again, it's a 40-day program, so it's a little bit longer program, 6 Sundays, emphasis on time, talent, gifts, and service. And that leads us to question time. And I'm sorry I didn't leave more time for that, but I hope we can get to everybody's questions. Kim, Jeff, who's reading? Who's got the questions?
I think Kim was going to watch for the questions. I don't see any questions.
Oh, okay. Maybe nobody has any. Well, that's all right. And I'm sorry if people were having problems seeing the slides. I kind of that one, I guess it was all in caps that caught my attention, but couldn't quite figure out a way to make them any bigger on everybody's screen when I was sharing.
I think Kim answered that question.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks.
While we're waiting for questions, I just wanted to mention how I appreciate the contextual approach and the recognition that what works in one person's church may not be the best campaign for another person's church.
Right.
I've been to so many of these various kinds of seminars and webinars over the many years that I've been involved in this ministry. And that doesn't always get communicated. It's there, and sometimes you get the sense that someone has a product to sell, but it's like this is the campaign. If you use this and follow the directions, you'll be successful. And that's not necessarily the case because of the difference in contexts. So I really appreciated that.
Well, I'm thankful of everybody for your time tonight, and you're able to join us, and 18 people. It's great.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to, before I get off, I do want to mention we have a webinar coming up, and this may be something that your church is involved in or not. But one of the things we're finding with online giving and churches having, databases on their computers is that one of the values we start to ask folks to look for is when you are trying to pick out which platform you're going to use or which software you're going to use. It's a big advantage if your software talks to each other. And so I met this young man from up in Syracuse who works for Tithely, is one of the online giving platforms. And I happen to know that Tithely also provided a church management software, which my sister's church was using, and they were raving about, called Breeze. And so I said, could we do a webinar? We just would talk about the idea of how do we find what's the advantages of finding software that can talk to each other and integrate. So that'll be on November 19th. And again, invite you to sign up for it. It'll be a free webinar, and it'll be our last one of the year. And I'm looking forward to talking. And if your church is looking for a platform and you're thinking about Tithely, Brandon has told me he's going to bring an offer for a special discount for United Methodists who are attending the webinar to get started and give Tithely a try. So anyway, just wanted to mention that.
And we do have a question here, and it's a good one. In a time of dwindling attendance, big givers passing, and remaining members on limited income, what do you see as the solution to decreasing financial support and participation?
Yeah, so that's you're in a tough situation. We understand that, and as I said earlier, sometimes we have to kind of create a new vision of who we are as a church. If we were a middle-sized church and now we find ourselves becoming a smaller church, there are ways we adjust what we can do in mission in terms of staff and things like that. But one of the things I remind folks about is that we do have folks in your congregation. And again, I'm speaking in a general way. I'm not going against what I said about context, but sometimes what we find is the best way we can kind of do to continue that is to have the opportunity, and especially if we have a lot of older people, is to remind them about opportunities there are to give in other ways besides giving from the income pocket. There's the asset pocket that people have. Not everybody, I think, is aware of the fact that if you have an IRA and you take the money out, you have to pay tax on it. But if you arrange for the people who manage your IRA to give that money directly to the church, you avoid paying that tax. And I know a lot of folks are finding that that's a great way for them to increase their giving, is by using money that they put aside in the IRA that they may not be needing right now and being able to use in that way. People may have an asset or a stock that has been in their family for a long time, and this is more Jeff's area than it is mine, but things appreciate, and that's a tax liability. So I have a couple of on our page, on our webpage, I have a couple of inserts. One is about year-end giving, bulletin inserts, and another one is about IRAs. And that may open up some possibilities for some of your people, I think. And then again, in talking with folks in the foundation, to talk to people about, doing some long-range planning, legacy giving, or deferred giving in that way. And again, this is the foundation's area that really can strengthen. So those are just some of the places that you might think about that. The webinar I did on Tuesday night should be posted probably today or tomorrow. And it was, year end, what can you do as a push on the year end? And I gave 12 ideas about things that people might try out. So if you go to the UMC's discipleship.org/stewardship site, that's right on it's still pinned as the top featured thing there. And if you click on it, the video probably is up already. I haven't had a chance to check today, but that might give you some ideas as well.
Great, Ken. And I would encourage churches to make legacy giving or planned giving from accumulated resources part of the regular conversation around stewardship. I mean, stewardship should not just be a one season kind of topic, but a year-round focus on stewardship where planned giving is part of that. And that doesn't help you immediately, but the question mentioned that people were dying. Many of the big givers were dying.
Yeah.
Imagine if some of those big givers knew that there was an opportunity that they could make a legacy gift and continue to support the church in their death. It's kind of one way of giving evidence to the resurrection. I think that that someone's giving continues to live on.
Mhm.
So as Ken mentioned, Kim and I would be happy to meet with churches or finance committees, trustees, whatever group, to help with those conversations.
I think also the idea of year-round stewardship, talking about it all the time, increases the idea that it's discipleship.
Mhm.
That giving is not a matter of paying the bills, but it's a matter of expressing our gratitude toward God for what we have received. And I think one of the benefits of that can be increased giving.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
gonna-
thanks everyone for your participation.
I do have a couple of announcements.
Yeah, I was going to turn it over to you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Finish your sentence. I'm sorry.
Thank you for coming. Here are some announcements.
Okay, thank you. We are doing this year a theme of a year in stewardship, and this was this month's theme, the topic of this webinar. Every month in your email insights, which is our email newsletter, you'll see a different column related to the theme of the month. If you don't receive that insights newsletter, let us know and we'll get you subscribed. You will receive in a few days an email about this webinar with a link to the recording, and all of the resources that Ken talked about will be listed. I've been taking notes as he's been talking, and so all the books he talked about will be on the list, as well as the links he mentioned. That's also on our webpage, and that link will be in the email as well. Our next webinar is Telling the Story of Ministry. Reverend Meredith McNabb of Indiana University, the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving, will be the leader for that webinar. I think it'll be great. I hope you're there. It's December 12th at 7 p.m. and we'll include the link to register in that email you'll get this next week. So watch for that.
Kim, I'm just going to mention, I popped that link in for the webinar that about the year-end giving there. If anybody wants to go up and take a peek at it. Again, I didn't take the time to see if I don't think the video is posted yet, because I opened the page and it usually says something recording available. So probably tomorrow or by Monday, at least, it should be posted. So I just made a little plug for that. I think it'll be helpful.
The foundation will also be sending out some year-end giving information.
If you wanted to use the foundation's year-end giving brochure as an insert for your bulletins, let us know in the next month or so. We'll order extra for you. We provide those free of charge, and we're happy to send some extra to your church.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you so much, Ken. We always appreciate your timely and good information. We'll see you next month, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see you next month. Yep. This is the other side of the country. So all right. Thanks. Good being with you, folks. Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.